The movie opens with a group of youngsters clad in prison uniforms, working under the scorching sun. They appear to be digging holes in the middle of nowhere. While working in such hostile conditions, a young boy named Barfbag purposely gets bitten by a snake to escape the hard labor. The scene then cuts to a boy named Stanley Yelnats walking in the street. Suddenly, a pair of sneakers falls on his head and knocks him down. He decides to keep the shoes as his crazy family is currently working on a remedy for stinky shoes. However, on his way back home, he is arrested by the police on the suspicion of stealing the shoes. It turns out they belong to a famous basketball player named Clyde Livingston, who had donated them to charity. The police take the boy home and inform his family about the incident. However, the Yelnats aren't shocked, and they blame the misfortune on a family curse. Stanley is then presented to the court, and the judge sentences him to 18 months detention at Camp Green Lake, a juvenile detention center. There, he is introduced to the manager, Mr. Sir. Mr. Sir is a very strict individual, and he warns Stanley that there's no point in running away from the camp because there's no water for miles. He also talks about the venomous reptiles of the region, which have apparently killed a lot of people. Stanley is then given his uniform and told to dig 5 feet deep and 5 feet in diameter every day to build character, although he isn't supposed to look for anything in particular. If he happens to find something interesting, he might earn a day off. God, I love this story. In the next scene, camp psychologist Dr. Pendansky introduces Stanley to a group of boys who go by the nicknames X-Ray, Armpit, Squid, Zigzag, Magnet, and Zero. Zero is always silent because he is the youngest. Stanley takes the place of Barfbag in the squad after he was rushed to the hospital earlier. At lunch, when Stanley reveals that he was wrongly accused of stealing Livington's sneakers, Zero breaks his silence for the first time, surprising everyone. A flashback then reveals that Stanley's great-grandfather, Stanley, had amassed a fortune in the stock market, but one day, he is robbed by a woman named Kissin' Kate Barlow. This sends him into a state of shock, and in a matter of months, he becomes completely broke. With no other choice, Stanley I starts working at a European farm where he falls in love with his master's daughter. He seeks advice from the local fortune teller, Madame Zeroni, on how to win the girl's heart. However, Zeroni tells him that the girl is foolish, so he should immigrate to the US instead. Stanley I gives it a good thought, but in the end, he disregards the advice and goes to ask the girl's hand in marriage. Unfortunately, the girl's father tells him to bring a big fat pig as a dowry if he wishes to stand a chance of marrying his daughter. Stanley I again goes to Zeroni, and she gives him a piglet, telling him to carry it up the mountain and make it drink water from an enriching natural stream. Stanley I agrees and vows to visit Zeroni after he succeeds. He also promises to carry the frail old woman up the mountain so she can regain her strength and youth. Eventually, the pig grows bigger in size, and Stanley I carries it to the girl's father. However, as Zeroni had said, the girl turns out to be very foolish. She is now unable to choose between Stanley and another average-looking suitor. Disappointed, Stanley decides to follow Zeroni's first advice and sets off for America. But in the process, he completely forgets to keep his promise to her and does not carry her up the mountain. This infuriates the fortune teller so much that she curses his entire male lineage for eternity. Back in the present, Stanley grows accustomed to life in the camp. One day, he discovers a fossil and shows it to the counselor, Dr. Pendansky, hoping to secure some time off. However, the counselor tells him that the warden isn't interested in fossils. He also mentions that there used to be a lake here, and all the land around it belonged to the warden's grandfather. The movie then flashes back again to 100 years ago, when the warden's grandfather ruled the town. A man named Sam is seen selling onions. He has a crush on a local teacher, Catherine, so he gives her a sack of onions for free. However, in exchange, she gives him a jar of peaches that she picked herself. In the present, Stanley wins over X-Ray and the others, and they accept him into their squad by giving him the nickname Caveman. This is because he is good at finding fossils. One afternoon, he receives a letter from his mother and laughs as he reads her stories. Soon, Zero arrives there and inquires what he is laughing at, admitting that he can't read. He then requests that Stanley teach him how to read, but the latter declines, saying that he gets exhausted from digging all day. One day, Stanley discovers an object resembling a shell casing with the initials KB. Unfortunately, X-Ray snatches it from him and gives it to the counselor to get the day off. The counselor then informs the camp warden, who is revealed to be a woman, about the finding. Impressed by the object, she rewards X-Ray Stanley and orders everyone to dig up his hole further. The movie again flashes back 100 years in the past. Sam visits Miss Catherine and offers to fix her leaking roof in exchange for 3 jars of her spiced peaches. Catherine agrees, and over time, the two grow closer to each other. However, other men in the town also start to show interest in her. One night, a man named Trout Walker hits on her, but Catherine brutally ignores him. Weeks pass, and Sam eventually completes her repair work. But despite this, the two continue hanging out. One day, he musters up the courage to kiss her. Unfortunately, Trout Walker sees this, and in a fit of jealousy, he burns down Catherine's school. When the latter finds out about this, she rushes to the local sheriff for help, but even he tries to kiss her. He also tells Catherine that her lover will soon be executed for the crime of kissing a white woman. Terrified, she rushes to warn Sam, but it is too late as he is shot in his own boat. This sends Catherine into a state of shock, and so she decides to avenge her lover's death. A few days later, she kills the sheriff and finally gives him the kiss before leaving. After this, Catherine never looks back, and her journey as an outlaw begins. She goes on to loot wealthy merchants and landowners before executing them and bidding them farewell with her signature kiss. This gives her the nickname Kissing Kate Barlow. Meanwhile, after Sam's execution, it never rains in the town, and the lake eventually dries up, rendering Trout Walker's land worthless. Back in the present, one day, when Mr. Sir brings the boys water, Magnet steals a bag of seed from him. Unfortunately, Mr. Sir notices the missing bag and threatens to punish everyone. When no one steps up, Stanley decides to take the fall to save everyone else. Mr. Sir takes him to the warden, hoping to get him punished for the theft. However, the unpredictable warden scolds Mr. Sir instead for distracting the boy from his digging. When Stanley returns to the field, Zero digs his hole as a way to thank him for saving everyone. Moved by the gesture, Stanley offers to teach him how to read and write. As they hang out, Stanley puts 2 and 2 together and figures out that the shell casing he found earlier was actually a tube of lipstick. It belonged to none other than Kissin' Kate Barlow. At the same time, Zero also reveals that his real name is Hector Zeroni. It appears that the boy is related to Madame Zeroni, who cursed the Yelnats family years ago. One day, the manager finds out that Stanley makes Zero dig his holes. He berates both of them for being useless, and hearing this, Zero becomes so enraged that he smacks the man with a shovel and runs away from the camp. Later, the warden and the other camp officials discuss Zero's escape. They predict that he won't survive more than a week because Zero is an orphan. It is revealed that his mother left him in a park and never came back. Stanley overhears the conversation and it deeply upsets him. Later that night, he recalls how his great-grandfather Stanley Yelnats I survived 16 days in the desert after Kate Barlow robbed his wagon. It turns out Stanley I survived due to a place called God's Finger. No one knows where it is because Stanley I had gone crazy when he was finally found. The following day, Stanley decides to run away to rescue his friend Zero. After walking for hours in the desert, he finally finds Zero sleeping under an old abandoned boat. The latter reveals that he survived because of the jars full of peaches he found in the boat. It is evident that the boat belongs to the late Sam. The boys then notice a mountain in the distance, which looks like a human thumb. When Stanley gazes at it intensely, it suddenly dawns on him that the mountain is God's finger. Hopeful that they might find something, the boys start scaling the mountain, but halfway through, Zero gets tired and is unable to move any further. Refusing to give up on him, Stanley carries Zero on his back and takes him up the mountain. This, unknowingly, fulfills his great-grandfather's promise to Madame Zeroni by carrying her great-grandson. Once they reach the top of the mountain, they find the creek. They also discover the onions that Sam grew next to the water. Meanwhile, back home, Stanley's father finally finds a remedy for stinking shoes, a solution of peaches and onions.
I can't smell anything!
Stanley is also declared innocent, and the family's attorney arrives at the camp to pick him up. However, the warden withholds the information about Stanley's escape. The following day, Zero recovers and confesses that Stanley ended up at the camp because of him. It turns out it was Zero who unknowingly stole the sneakers from the charity auction, and when he noticed the police looking for them, he panicked and threw them off a bridge. Due to Stanley's bad luck, the sneakers happened to land on top of him. Hearing this, the latter is taken aback, but he is not upset. Instead, he is grateful, as he managed to find God's thumb. The movie again flashes back to the past. Kate Barlow finally finds Sam's boat in the dried-up lake that is now turned into a desert. As she sits there by herself, remembering her late lover, Trout Walker and his wife arrive at the scene. They demand to know where Kate has hidden all her stolen treasures, as they are desperate for money after they lost everything to the drought. Kate refuses to help them and instead commits the unthinkable by letting herself get bitten by a yellow-spotted lizard. Since then, Trout Walker's predecessors, including the current warden, have been digging through the dried lake in search of Kate's treasure. Back in the present, Stanley and Zero return to the field to look for the treasure chest where he originally found Kate's lipstick tube. They eventually succeed, but right then, the warden and Mr. Sir arrive and try to seize the trunk. However, they quickly back off when they notice that the yellow-spotted lizards have climbed on to the boys. The next morning, the warden is still waiting for the lizards to go away so that she can steal the chest. It turns out that the boys are alive because the lizards are averse to the onions they have been eating. After a while, Stanley's attorney also arrives with the police. The warden accuses the boys of stealing her trunk, but her claims are quickly rebuffed when Zero notices Stanley Yelnats written right on the trunk. Consequently, Stanley is allowed to leave with the trunk, while the warden and her crooks are arrested. It also finally rains in the desert for the first time in 100 years. Later, the boys head to Stanley's home, where they share the treasure equally. Using the newfound wealth, Zero hires a PI to successfully find his mother, and it's revealed that she too had been looking for him all this while. The movie ends as the boys become neighbors and invite all the released camp kids to visit. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.